Hollywood's golden curtain hides more than just movie magic. It conceals the forbidden children of America's most beloved stars. Behind those perfect smiles lay scandals so explosive they could destroy careers overnight. Ready to discover which beloved icon kept their own flesh and blood hidden for decades? 1. Clark Gable and Loretta Young's love child. The king of Hollywood had a reputation as a ladies' man, but few know about the daughter he never acknowledged. While filming Call of the Wild in 1935, Gable's steamy off-camera romance with co-star Loretta Young resulted in a pregnancy that would rock Hollywood if discovered. Young, a devout Catholic unwilling to admit having a child out of wedlock, went to extraordinary lengths to hide the truth. She disappeared to Europe during her pregnancy, then bizarrely adopted her own biological daughter, naming her Judy. The poor girl grew up completely unaware that her adoptive mother was actually her birth mother, and that her father was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood history. The deception was masterfully orchestrated. Young even drove around to different orphanages with photographers, pretending to shop for a child to adopt. Meanwhile, anyone who saw Judy could immediately notice her distinctive ears, exact replicas of Gable's famously prominent ones. Young maintained this elaborate charade for decades, even as whispers circulated through Hollywood. Judy herself didn't discover the truth until 1966, when she was 31 years old. Imagine learning your entire childhood was built on a lie, and that Clark Gable, the man famous for, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," really didn't give a damn about acknowledging you. The scandal was so potentially devastating that Young maintained the adoption story publicly until her death in 2000, finally admitting the truth in a posthumously released autobiography. Hollywood's golden couple kept their golden secret at the cost of a daughter who never knew her true identity. 2. Charlie Chaplin and Lita Grey's hidden sons. The beloved tramp of silent cinema had a dark secret that would shock his millions of fans worldwide. Chaplin, already in his mid-30s, became involved with Lita Grey when she was just 16 years old, while filming The Gold Rush. When she became pregnant, studio executives panicked at the potential scandal that could destroy Chaplin's wholesome image. Forced into a hasty marriage to avoid charges that could have sent Chaplin to prison, Grey gave birth to 2 sons, Charles Jr. and Sidney. The marriage was catastrophically unhappy from the start, with Grey later describing Chaplin as controlling and emotionally distant. When they divorced in 1927, the legal documents became the biggest Hollywood scandal of the decade. The divorce papers contained allegations so shocking that newspapers refused to print them in full. Grey received what was then the largest divorce settlement in American history, $825,000, equivalent to over $12 million today. But the real price was paid by the children, who became pawns in a vicious publicity battle. Chaplin barely acknowledged his sons publicly and was an absent father at best. Charles Jr. later wrote a heartbreaking memoir describing how his father would sometimes fail to recognize him during their infrequent visits. The boys grew up with the burden of their father's fame, but none of its benefits. The scandal followed Chaplin for years, contributing to his eventual exile from America during the McCarthy era. His sons had to create their own identities while carrying the famous name of a father who wanted nothing to do with them, proving that even the tramp's legendary smile masked a family tragedy worthy of his most dramatic films. 3. Joan Crawford and Douglas Fairbanks. Sr.'s rumored daughter. Hollywood's original Scream Queen harbored a secret that would have made her fans scream for entirely different reasons. Crawford's meteoric rise to fame in the 1920s coincided with rumors of a torrid affair with the married swashbuckling superstar Douglas Fairbanks Sr., who happened to be married to America's sweetheart Mary Pickford. The whispers around Hollywood claimed that Crawford gave birth to a daughter in 1926 who was quickly and quietly given up for adoption. Crawford, known for her fierce ambition, couldn't allow an illegitimate child to derail her rising career. The studio system was ruthless about maintaining stars' images, and unwed mothers were absolute career killers. What makes this story particularly fascinating is that years later, Crawford adopted 4 children very publicly. Was this her attempt to reclaim the motherhood she'd been forced to abandon? Her adopted daughter Christina famously wrote "Mommy Dearest," portraying Crawford as an abusive monster. Was this perhaps Crawford's displaced guilt manifesting as rage? While never confirmed, the timing of Crawford's sudden illness and disappearance from the public eye in 1926 aligns perfectly with the rumored pregnancy. Hollywood insiders whispered that powerful studio head Louis B. Mayer personally arranged the adoption to protect his valuable star. Fairbanks never acknowledged any connection to the child, and his marriage to Pickford, Hollywood's royal couple who literally lived in a mansion called Pickfair, continued for years afterward. If true, this child would have united the bloodlines of two of cinema's most powerful dynasties, yet lived an anonymous life, never knowing her famous parents. The ultimate Hollywood tragedy played out far from the cameras. 4. Rita Hayworth and Orson Welles' protected daughter. Prepare to be stunned. The love goddess and the boy genius of Hollywood produced more than just the film noir classic The Lady from Shanghai. They created a daughter whose very existence was manipulated by studio publicity. Rebecca Wells was born in 1944 during what appeared to be a fairy tale marriage, but the reality was far darker than fans realized. While Columbia Pictures initially promoted the family as the perfect Hollywood union, behind closed doors, Orson's obsessive work habits and Rita's increasing unhappiness created a powder keg. Studio head Harry Cohn, who was obsessed with Hayworth, actively worked to undermine the marriage, seeing Wells as competition for his star's attention. When the couple divorced in 1947, young Rebecca became a virtual prisoner of studio publicity. Columbia Pictures controlled when and how she could be photographed with her mother, often staging candid family moments while prohibiting any photos of Rebecca with her father. The studio even dictated what Rebecca could tell the press about her parents. Wells, whose career was already in decline after Citizen Kane, found himself unable to fight the studio system. He would go months without seeing his daughter as he traveled seeking financing for films. Meanwhile, Hayworth was trapped in her bombshell image, famously lamenting that men went to bed with Gilda but woke up with me. Rebecca grew up caught between two legendary parents who were too busy fighting their own demons to provide stability. She eventually fled Hollywood altogether, seeking anonymity away from her parents' long shadows. Unlike other Hollywood offspring who leveraged famous last names, Rebecca Wells actively hid from her heritage, a stunning rejection of the celebrity that destroyed her childhood. 5. Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini's illegitimate son. Hollywood's most shocking scandal of the 1940s wasn't just whispered in private, it was denounced in Congress. The beloved star of Casablanca, who portrayed nuns and saints on screen, became America's fallen angel when news broke of her affair with Italian director Roberto Rossellini, while both were married to others. The scandal exploded when Bergman became pregnant and gave birth to a son, Roberto Jr., in 1950. The backlash was unprecedented. Senator Edwin C. Johnson stood on the Senate floor and denounced Bergman as a powerful influence for evil, while theaters canceled showings of her films. Overnight, one of Hollywood's most respected actresses became a pariah. Bergman was effectively exiled from Hollywood for 7 years. Her films were boycotted, fan clubs disbanded, and her previous movies were pulled from theaters. All this while her American husband and daughter were left behind, creating a media narrative of an abandoned family that further vilified the actress. Young Roberto grew up in Italy under intense scrutiny, with paparazzi documenting his every move. The pressure of being the physical embodiment of Hollywood's greatest scandal clearly marked him. Though his parents eventually married, they divorced when he was just 6 years old, leaving him caught between two famous parents and two continents. The irony? Just 7 years after being America's most hated woman, Bergman returned triumphantly to Hollywood and won an Oscar for Anastasia, receiving a standing ovation from the same industry that had banished her. Meanwhile, her son remained in Europe, a living reminder of how quickly public opinion could turn against even the most beloved stars. Roberto Jr. later became a filmmaker himself, perhaps trying to understand the powerful forces that had shaped his controversial birth. 6. Eddie Fisher and Elizabeth Taylor's daughter born amid scandal. When America's wholesome crooner left America's sweetheart for America's bombshell, it created the celebrity love triangle that defined the late 1950s. Eddie Fisher abandoned his picture-perfect family with Debbie Reynolds to marry Elizabeth Taylor after the death of Taylor's husband Mike Todd, who happened to be Fisher's best friend. The public turned viciously against Fisher and Taylor, with Reynolds portrayed as the innocent victim along with her two young children, Carrie and Todd. What few people realized was that Taylor was secretly pregnant during the height of the scandal. She suffered a miscarriage that nearly claimed her life, which many attributed to the stress of being America's most hated homewrecker. When Taylor eventually gave birth to a daughter with Fisher in 1961, the child entered a world where her parents' marriage was already crumbling. Taylor had begun filming Cleopatra and was falling for her co-star Richard Burton in what would become an even bigger scandal. Little Maria Fisher would spend only her first year with both parents together. The circumstances of Maria's birth and early childhood were so chaotic that Taylor later arranged for her to be legally adopted by her next husband, Richard Burton, completely erasing Fisher from her life. Fisher, once America's top recording artist, saw his career implode after the scandal. He became a distant figure, with his daughter Carrie Fisher later writing that he was married to Elizabeth Taylor's left ventricle. Maria grew up with a succession of famous fathers, as Taylor married and divorced repeatedly. The trauma of being born into such public turmoil led her to avoid the spotlight entirely as an adult, unlike her famous half-sister Carrie Fisher, who turned her Hollywood upbringing into comedic material. Maria chose to disappear from public view, the forgotten child of Hollywood's most spectacular marriage breakup. 7. Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner's secret heartbreak. The chairman of the board and Hollywood's most beautiful bad girl didn't just make headlines with their explosive fights, they hid a tragic secret that would have changed both their legacies forever. During their tempestuous marriage in the early 1950s, Gardner became pregnant at the worst possible time in Sinatra's career. Sinatra's star had fallen dramatically. His voice was failing, his record contract had been canceled, and he was desperate for the role in From Here to Eternity that would eventually save his career. Gardner, at the peak of her fame, made the heartbreaking decision to terminate the pregnancy, believing a child would destroy Sinatra's comeback chances. What fans never knew was that this wasn't Gardner's only pregnancy with Sinatra. Sources close to the couple revealed that Gardner had actually carried another Sinatra child nearly to term before losing it, a devastating blow that contributed to their relationship's volatility. The couple's inability to have children became a source of private agony behind their public battles. The emotional fallout was catastrophic. Sinatra, raised Catholic, was torn between relief and guilt. Gardner later confessed to close friends that she regretted the decision for the rest of her life. Their marriage dissolved shortly afterward, but they remained enigmatically connected for decades, with Sinatra sending Gardner money until her death despite his subsequent marriages. The cruel irony. After their divorce, Sinatra's career skyrocketed, while Gardner's gradually declined. She never had children, later telling a biographer, "I got pregnant all the time, love, but I just couldn't hold on to them." Meanwhile, Sinatra went on to have 3 children with his first wife, making the child he never had with the love of his life, perhaps his greatest personal regret. Their lost children represent one of Hollywood's most poignant what might have been stories. 8. Judy Garland and Sid Luft's daughter, born amid studio control. The tragic Wizard of Oz star lived under such intense studio surveillance that even her pregnancies were considered studio property. When Garland became pregnant by her third husband, Sid Luft, in 1952, she was already battling the pill addiction MGM had fostered to control her weight and working hours. The studio had previously forced her to terminate a pregnancy early in her career, convincing the teenage star that having a baby would destroy her good girl image. This traumatic experience contributed to Garland's lifelong psychological struggles. When she became pregnant with Lorna Luft, she was determined to have this baby despite MGM's disapproval. Studio executives were furious as pregnancy violated the morality clauses in her contract. They spread rumors that Garland was mentally unfit, hoping to gain legal control over her child. The studio even had spies reporting on her prenatal care and attempted to pressure doctors into declaring her unfit for motherhood. Garland fled temporarily to Boston to escape the surveillance, giving birth away from Hollywood's watchful eyes. Upon her return, the studio created a fictitious narrative about Garland's perfect family life for fan magazines, complete with staged photos that portrayed a domestic bliss that didn't exist. Little Lorna grew up watching her mother battle addiction issues that stemmed directly from studio abuse. She later described checking her mother's pulse while she slept, terrified of finding her dead. The psychological burden placed on this child was enormous. She wasn't just Judy Garland's daughter. She was living proof of her mother's defiance against a system that had tried to control her reproductive choices. The tragic cycle continued when Lorna developed her own substance abuse issues, later writing that she felt she was born into chaos. Her birth, meant to be Garland's declaration of independence, instead became another chapter in one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking legacies of control and exploitation. 9. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn's rumored child. Hollywood's most enduring secret couple may have hidden more than just their 26-year relationship. Tracy, a Catholic who refused to divorce his wife Louise, conducted his affair with Hepburn with remarkable discretion for Hollywood. But rumors persisted for decades about a child born early in their relationship and given up for adoption. The timeline fits suspiciously well. Hepburn mysteriously disappeared from public view for several months in 1939, claiming to be resting in Europe. When she returned, she had lost weight and appeared uncharacteristically subdued. Tracy, meanwhile, increased his drinking substantially during this period, concerning friends and colleagues. Studio fixers, employed specifically to make stars' problems disappear, allegedly arranged the entire matter with such efficiency that no records exist. MGM head Louis B. Mayer supposedly personally intervened to ensure total secrecy, recognizing that both stars' careers would be ruined by the scandal. Tracy for adultery and Hepburn for bearing a child out of wedlock. What makes this rumor particularly compelling is Hepburn's lifelong support of various children's charities and her curious interest in adoption cases. She never had children with any of her partners, yet displayed an unusual knowledge of adoption procedures when discussing them with colleagues who were adopting. Tracy's wife Louise, who raised their son John Tracy, who was deaf, dedicated her life to helping deaf children. Some Hollywood insiders whispered that her charitable work was partially motivated by knowledge of her husband's secret child, a gesture of karmic balance for the family her husband had fractured. While never confirmed, this rumored child would have united the bloodlines of two of cinema's greatest actors, a secret heir to an unparalleled Hollywood legacy who may have lived an entirely ordinary life, never knowing that Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy were their biological parents. The ultimate Hollywood mystery. 10. Marlene Dietrich and Jean Gabin's war-born daughter. The German siren and the French film icon created an international incident with their forbidden love child, born amid the chaos of World War II. While both were established stars in Europe before the war, they met in Hollywood as exiles from their Nazi-occupied home countries, beginning a passionate affair that produced more than just headlines. When Dietrich discovered she was pregnant in 1941, the situation was impossibly complicated. She was still married to Rudolf Sieber, though they had an open relationship, while Gabin had a wife in occupied France. More critically, Dietrich was Hollywood's most prominent anti-Nazi German, making her personal life a matter of wartime propaganda. Studio executives panicked at the potential scandal. A pregnant married German woman having another man's child while her husband fought against her homeland would destroy Dietrich's carefully cultivated image as America's favorite good German. The child was born in secret and immediately hidden away in Europe with trusted friends. The baby girl, given a false identity, was raised in neutral Switzerland until after the war. Dietrich visited rarely, always disguised, while Gabin never publicly acknowledged her existence. When Gabin returned to liberated France as a war hero, having served in the Free French forces, reconnecting with his illegitimate daughter became impossible without damaging his newfound patriotic image. What few know is that Dietrich financially supported this child her entire life, channeling funds through a complex network of accounts to maintain secrecy. The daughter apparently learned her true parentage only after Dietrich's death, when she received a substantial inheritance and a letter explaining her origins. The most heartbreaking aspect? Photos suggest Gavin carried a small picture of a young girl in his wallet until his death, a daughter he helped create but never claimed, sacrificed to the political complexities of a world at war and 2 international careers that couldn't survive the scandal. 11. Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal's devastating choice. Hollywood's quintessential strong, silent cowboy faced his most challenging role off-screen as the married lover of young actress Patricia Neal, who became pregnant at the height of his fame. Their affair began during filming of The Fountainhead in 1949, despite Cooper being 25 years older and very publicly married. When Neal discovered she was pregnant in 1950, Cooper was trapped between his Catholic upbringing, his marriage to socialite Veronica Balfa, and studio contracts with morality clauses that would trigger career-ending penalties. Under intense pressure, Neal terminated the pregnancy, a decision that haunted both stars for the rest of their lives. What the public never knew was that Cooper actually wanted the child. According to Neal's later accounts, he briefly considered divorcing his wife and facing the career backlash. Studio head Jack Warner personally intervened, threatening to blacklist both actors if they created a scandal that would damage the studio's reputation and film profits. The emotional aftermath was devastating. Neal suffered a nervous breakdown, while Cooper developed ulcers and began drinking heavily. Their affair continued tortuously for 2 more years before Cooper's wife orchestrated a public reconciliation to save their marriage, forcing Neal out of his life completely. The cruel twist, Neal later married writer Roald Dahl and had 5 children, but lost 1 daughter to measles complications and saw her infant son severely injured when his stroller was struck by a taxi. She would later tell friends that she felt these tragedies were divine punishment for the child she didn't have with Cooper. Cooper, meanwhile, reconnected with his Catholic faith before dying of cancer in 1961. Neal reportedly visited him on his deathbed where, according to her autobiography, they discussed the child who never was. Their lost child represents one of Hollywood's most poignant what might have been stories, a secret that altered both stars' lives forever but never made the headlines. 12. Marlon Brando's child with his housekeeper. The legendary method actor brought method acting to his personal life by hiding a child in plain sight, literally under his own roof. In the early 1960s, at the height of his fame, Brando began a relationship with his Mexican housekeeper that resulted in the birth of a daughter. Rather than acknowledge the child, he created an elaborate fiction that continued for years. The girl was raised in Brando's home but introduced to visitors as his niece or as the housekeeper's child from a previous relationship. This bizarre arrangement created a psychological hall of mirrors for the child, who grew up calling her own mother Miss Maria in front of guests while calling her biological father Uncle Marlon. What made this deception particularly cruel was that Brando openly acknowledged his other children from various relationships. This daughter alone remained his secret, despite living in his house. Hollywood insiders knew the truth, but a combination of Brando's power and the era's racial attitudes kept it from becoming public knowledge. The psychological impact on the child was profound. She later described the confusion of watching her father embrace his acknowledged children while treating her with careful distance whenever others were present. The housekeeper remained employed for decades, essentially trading her silence for financial security. When Brando's will was read after his death in 2004, this secret daughter was included, confirming what many had long suspected. The adult children from his recognized relationships reportedly contested this portion of the will, arguing that she had no legitimate claim, adding insult to a lifetime of injury. This bizarre family arrangement, a child hidden in full view, reveals how even the most progressive Hollywood star of his generation maintained appearances at the expense of his own flesh and blood. It's perhaps the most surreal example of Hollywood's capacity for creating alternate realities both on and off the screen. 13. Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh's daughter's surprising heritage. America's golden couple seemed to have the perfect Hollywood family, until their daughter discovered the shocking truth about her actual conception. Jamie Lee Curtis, now a star in her own right, grew up believing the carefully constructed public narrative about her parents' picture-perfect marriage. The official story, Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh, Hollywood's most beautiful couple, married in 1951 and had two planned wanted daughters during their fairy tale union. The reality? According to Hollywood insiders, Jamie Lee was conceived during a brief reconciliation after the couple had already secretly separated. The marriage was already failing by 1957, with Curtis's notorious infidelities and Lee's growing resentment creating an explosive home environment. Studio executives, desperate to maintain the couple's marketable image, orchestrated a public second honeymoon to salvage both the marriage and the substantial box office draw of having Hollywood's perfect couple intact. Jamie Lee was the unplanned result of this studio-mandated reconciliation. When she was born in 1958, the publicity machine went into overdrive, presenting her arrival as further proof of Hollywood's most successful marriage. The truth, that she was essentially a last-ditch attempt to save a failing relationship, was carefully concealed. The facade collapsed completely in 1962 when the couple divorced. Curtis subsequently made the stunning public statement that Janet and I had a wonderful marriage, it just didn't work out. This absurd contradiction revealed how thoroughly the studio system had distorted reality. Jamie Lee later described growing up with the disorienting experience of seeing her parents' perfect marriage commemorated in fan magazines while witnessing their actual contentious relationship during visitations. She became determined to avoid the falseness of Hollywood relationships, eventually building one of the entertainment industry's most genuine and lasting marriages with Christopher Guest, perhaps the most positive outcome possible from a union that began as little more than a publicity stunt. Which of these Hollywood secrets shocked you the most? Can you imagine keeping your own child a secret for the sake of your career? The golden age of cinema may have created timeless films, but it also created countless broken families and hidden children. Comment below with which star's behavior you find most unforgivable, and whether today's celebrities are any better at balancing fame and family.